Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? Tommy Beresford had never trusted evenings that required a dinner jacket, polished shoes, and the kind of polite smile that made one's cheeks ache long before the first glass of sherry. The moment he and Tuppence stepped through the elegant doors of Lyric House, he felt the faint tightening sensation that always accompanied social events arranged by society matrons with far too much time and influence. Lyric House itself, a small yet ostentatiously refurbished West End theatre, glowed with velvet, gilt trim, and enough floral arrangements to smother a small countryside. It hosted intimate concerts, earnest charity readings, and gatherings attended by people who liked to say the word benefit with the gravity of a military operation. Tuppence, of course, took to the surroundings immediately. Her eyes shone with mischief as she surveyed the bustling foyer, drifting from display table to milling group with the lively purpose of someone simultaneously enjoying herself and conducting reconnaissance. "One must appreciate," she murmured, "how Lady Pettigrew manages to combine philanthropy with theatrical spectacle. The woman could raise funds for a church roof merely by announcing that she intended to reveal the winner of the most tasteful hat." "She invited us to lend prestige," Tommy said, affecting a swallow of his drink, a phrase which always fills me with dread. "Oh, nonsense," Tuppence straightened the lapel of his jacket. "It means she trusts us, and she hinted at odd backstage happenings. You know perfectly well that's the sort of phrase designed to wake your inner sleuth." "My inner sleuth is suffering indigestion." "You should have declined the sausage rolls at tea." Before he could retort, a trumpet flourish signalled the start of the evening programme. The guests drifted in a cheerful cluster toward the small auditorium. Tommy and Tuppence were swept along with them, past rows of plush seats, toward the low stage, where a pianist warmed up with delicate trills. Lady Pettigrew, a figure swathed in chiffon and confidence, stationed herself near the front row, offering greetings with regal benevolence. She spotted the Beresfords and gave them a grateful nod. The concert began lightly, a chamber trio followed by a young soprano who possessed impressive lungs despite her fragile frame. Tommy listened dutifully, but felt the familiar itch of restlessness creep through him. The lights, the whispering audience, the perfumed air, all pleasant in principle yet stifling in execution. When applause burst forth after the soprano's final note, he leaned toward Tuppence. "I'm going to stretch my legs," he whispered. "Don't stretch them into trouble," she whispered back. He slipped through the side aisle, pushing aside a panel of heavy velvet that served as a makeshift partition between the auditorium and a narrow service corridor. Here, the theatre's glamour thinned into a world of backstage pragmatism. Stacked equipment, dusty ropes, discarded programs, and the faint smell of something metallic mixed with floor polish. It was dimly lit, the single wall lamp casting pale amber across the corridor. Tommy inhaled the relative quiet like someone tasting freedom. He had taken only a few steps when something brushed his sleeve. Before he could turn, fingers closed around his arm with surprising urgency. A woman's voice, low, strained, trembling as though pulled from the depths of dread, whispered into the shadowed hush. "I killed him." Tommy froze. The woman's grip tightened. "I killed my husband. God forgive me." Her breath came unevenly, the scent unmistakable. Gardenia laced with clove, a striking mixture, oddly at odds with the desperation in her voice. Tommy opened his mouth, but before a single question could form, a lantern's bright glare pierced the corridor. A stagehand trudged forward, muttering apologies as he maneuvered props. The hand released him instantly. The woman vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Tommy spun, searching the shadows, but the corridor revealed nothing except scuffed floorboards and the lingering echo of her confession. The stagehand offered him a puzzled glance. "Everything all right, sir?" "Yes," Tommy said automatically, though his pulse thudded with the unmistakable rhythm of mystery. "Perfectly." He hurried back through the velvet curtain, weaving through rows of guests until he reached Tuppence. She looked at him sharply. "What on earth has happened? You look as though you've seen an apparition." "A woman grabbed me back there," Tommy murmured. She said she killed her husband. Tuppence did not waste breath expressing disbelief. Describe her. Tommy relayed every detail. Late 40s veiled hat, the particular perfume, the tremor in her voice. Tuppence's brows lifted. Gardenia and clove. That's distinctive. Let's ask quietly. They mingled with the interval chatter, dropping subtle inquiries. Several guests recognized the description instantly. Sounds like Mrs. Eleanor Draycott, one woman said with avid curiosity. Poor creature. Still terribly fragile after her husband died. Heart failure, I believe. Another man added, She's hardly been seen since the funeral. One felt she attended tonight only out of obligation, though I didn't see her anywhere near the side corridor. Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. Everything aligned, except the location. The pair drifted toward Lady Pettigrew, who bustled near a refreshments table with theatrical authority. "My dears," she exclaimed, "so pleased you came. Isn't the evening splendid? Mrs. Draycott is here, by the way. I insisted she attend. Such a delicate soul, but quite composed tonight." "May we greet her?" Tuppence asked lightly. "Of course," Lady Pettigrew said. "She's over there, speaking with the vicar." Tommy followed her pointing gesture. There stood Mrs. Eleanor Draycott. Her elegance was impeccable, a dark tailored dress, matching gloves, a delicate veil resting lightly against her brow. She laughed at something the vicar said, a small, measured laugh that spoke of perfect social composure. Her posture was graceful, her hands steady, her expression serene. Nothing, absolutely nothing, connected her to the quivering voice in the corridor, except the perfume. Tommy inhaled subtly. Even across the distance he caught the faintest thread of that same unmistakable fragrance. Tuppence leaned close. "Either she is giving an award-worthy performance," she murmured, "or someone is using her scent deliberately. In either case, she's at the centre of something." Tommy watched Mrs. Draycott shake hands with a couple nearby, poised and charming. He felt the hairs on his neck rise, not from fear, but from the peculiar sensation that the truth sat somewhere just out of reach, masked behind cultivated civility. As Mrs. Draycott turned, her gaze swept across the room, and for a fleeting second her eyes met Tommy's. Calm, polite, entirely untroubled. The whisper in the dark seemed suddenly unreal, like a half-remembered dream. But Tommy knew what he had heard, and he knew it hadn't been imagination. The woman had vanished too quickly to follow. Yet here she stood, immaculate and serene, as though she had never stepped behind that velvet curtain, or uttered a desperate confession that could shatter her carefully maintained world. Tuppence spoke softly. "Well, darling, what shall we do now?" Tommy's answer was steady. "We find out why a woman who appears perfectly composed felt compelled to confess murder to a stranger, and why she chose me." Mrs. Eleanor Draycott lifted a glass of champagne, her fingers elegant, her smile warm, and Tommy Beresford felt the unmistakable pull of mystery tightening around them like an unseen thread. Tommy had faced many awkward mornings in the course of detective work, but few felt quite as peculiar as standing on the polished steps of Mrs. Eleanor Draycott's Kensington townhouse, clutching a theatre programme as though it were a peace offering. The previous night's whisper still echoed in his ears with unnerving clarity. Tuppence, bright-eyed despite the early hour, rapped the brass knocker with the brisk assurance of someone calling on a friend rather than a possible murderess. "Do try not to look apprehensive," she murmured out of the corner of her mouth. "I'm not apprehensive," Tommy replied. "I'm charmingly cautious." The door opened with a quiet scrape, revealing a butler whose demeanour suggested that allowing visitors inside was a taxing and deeply personal sacrifice. "Yes?" Tuppence flashed her warmest society smile. "Good morning. We've come to return something Mrs. Draycott may have misplaced at the Lyric House last night. Might we trouble her for a moment?" The butler regarded the proffered programme with suspicion, as though it might conceal explosive powder. After an agonizing pause, he stepped back. "Very well. Please wait in the hall." They entered a space that exuded quiet wealth, cream-panelled walls, a large mirror framed in silver, the faint scent of lavender polish. Somewhere deeper in the house a clock chimed the half-hour with gentle solemnity. Footsteps approached, light but purposeful. Mrs. Eleanor Draycott appeared at the threshold of a sitting-room. She was dressed impeccably, a soft grey ensemble with a pearl brooch and neatly pinned hair. yet the glamour dimmed at close range. Tommy noticed smudges beneath her eyes, faint traces of fatigue that powder had not fully concealed. Her hands, clasped at her waist, trembled ever so slightly. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," she said politely. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "We do apologize for intruding," Tommy replied, offering the program. "We thought this might belong to you." Mrs. Draycott accepted it with a small, controlled smile. "How kind, but I believe I had my program when I left." "We weren't entirely sure," Tuppence said sweetly. "Tommy spotted it backstage." There was the tiniest pause before Mrs. Draycott answered. "Backstage? I wasn't anywhere near the side corridors. I left after the Sopranos' first performance. The atmosphere felt a bit overwhelming." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged the briefest glance. "We did hope to chat with you," Tuppence continued gently. "It was such an interesting evening." "Was it?" Mrs. Draycott's tone remained calm. "I found it quite uneventful. I returned home early and went straight to bed." The statement was delivered with the precision of a rehearsed line. Tommy's instincts twitched. He watched as she adjusted a bracelet with careful fingers. The tremor in her hands became more pronounced in that tiny motion. "We thought perhaps," Tuppence ventured, "that we might have crossed paths behind the curtain. A woman passed Tommy there in some distress." Mrs. Draycott's smile did not shift, but something in her eyes flickered. A flash of alarm quickly smoothed into composure. "I assure you, Mrs. Beresford, I was nowhere near the curtains. I hardly strayed from my seat. It's quite impossible that we met last night." Tommy spoke gently. "Forgive me, but the lady wore a veiled hat. Your perfume is distinctive, gardenia and clove." Mrs. Draycott stiffened. She glanced down at her clasped hands before answering. "An old custom. Henry liked it. I wear it out of habit." She took a breath. "But I did not speak to you last night, Mr. Beresford." There it was, the denial, smooth as a well-practiced lie, yet tinged with something brittle. She stepped back slightly, her posture straightening. "If you will excuse me, I have a busy morning ahead. Thank you for your trouble." The dismissal was unmistakable, though politely wrapped. The butler reappeared with uncanny timing, as though summoned telepathically. Tommy and Tuppence were shepherded toward the door with courteous determination. Once outside, Tommy exhaled. "Well, she certainly wants us gone." Tuppence linked her arm through his. "Not shocking. People who have secrets tend to prefer distance." She denied everything. "Everything except the tremor in her fingers," Tuppence said, "or the sleepless eyes, or the way she flinched at the word backstage." Tommy frowned. "If she wasn't the woman who grabbed me—" "She was," Tuppence said calmly. "Or she knows who was." Her denial was far too polished. They descended the steps slowly, as though hoping the house itself might betray another clue. An elderly neighbour watering potted geraniums along the shared fence peered at them with interest. She wore a wool cardigan, slippers, and the expression of someone who knew a satisfying quantity of local gossip. "You visiting Mrs. Draycott?" she asked, leaning conspiratorially forward. Tuppence brightened. "We were. Such a lovely home she has." The neighbour said. "Hasn't slept properly since her husband died, poor dear. And the visitors she's been getting don't help matters." Tommy paused mid-step. "Visitors?" "A man, usually late at night, limp in his left leg. Looks the sort who shouldn't be calling on respectable widows. I've told my daughter he's trouble," she sniffed with authority. "Creeps about like a cat burglar." Tuppence shot Tommy a triumphant glance. How very interesting. Before they could ask more, the neighbour's dog barked loudly, pulling her attention away. She retreated indoors with a nod, leaving the Beresfords alone on the pavement. Tommy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. A man with a limp calling late at night. That doesn't bode well. "Especially when combined with the widow's rehearsed denial," Tuppence said. "You must admit it's very suggestive." "Suggestive of what? Blackmail? Threats? An affair?" "Possibilities, darling. Delicious possibilities." They turned to leave when Tuppence stopped abruptly. Her gaze lifted toward an upstairs window. The curtain, which had been perfectly still a moment earlier, shifted by a fraction. Behind it stood a stern-faced woman, rigid as a statue, staring down at them. Her expression held no curiosity, merely sharp, watchful assessment. Tommy followed Tuppence's line of sight. "Friend of the family, perhaps?" Or a keeper of secrets, Tuppence said softly. The curtain dropped back into place with mechanical precision. They continued walking, heading toward the leafy crossroads. Kensington carried on with its genteel bustle. A passing milk float, a gentleman with a folded newspaper, a pair of children in school caps skipping ahead of their nanny. Yet the calmness only sharpened the oddities lingering behind them. Tommy broke the silence first. Even if the confession was real, why speak to me? Why not to Tuppence or to anyone else? Because you were alone in the dark, Tuppence replied, and people in fear sometimes take opportunities rather than choices. She may have panicked, or she may believe a man is less likely to doubt her. Tommy grimaced. That's flattering. Oh, quite. You're very doubt-resistant. They walked a few more paces before she continued. Tommy, that woman in the window, she looked like neither relative nor servant. Her posture was too supervisory, as though she were monitoring us. Or monitoring Mrs. Draycott. Tuppence nodded. Which begs the question, why does a widow require someone watching from the curtains? Fear is a powerful jailer. Tommy mulled this over. So you believe the whispered confession wasn't delusion or hysteria? No, Tuppence said decisively. It wasn't madness, it was fear, and fear always has a source. They reached the corner, where a newspaper boy called out headlines about foreign trade, political speeches, and an unfortunate scandal involving an aristocrat's runaway horse. Nothing remotely related to confessions of murder. Tommy stopped walking. Tuppence, we have two options. Investigate properly, or forget the whole matter. Tuppence slid her arm through his once more, smiling with that spark that had pulled him into adventure years ago. Darling, we haven't forgotten anything since 1922. Why start now? He chuckled, albeit uneasily. I suspected you'd say that. As well you should. A trembling widow, a vanished confession, a limping night visitor. It would be practically irresponsible not to investigate. Tommy looked back at the townhouse once more. The curtains remained still, but he felt an odd certainty growing in him, settling like a weight. She meant it, he said quietly. Whoever whispered to me, whether it was Mrs. Draycott or some other woman, she meant every word. Tuppence's voice softened. Then let's find out why. They turned toward the nearest taxi stand, their steps quickening with purpose. Behind them, in the silent upper window of Mrs. Draycott's house, the curtain shifted again, just slightly, as though acknowledging their departure. Inspector Marston's office at the Kensington police station had always reminded Tommy of an overworked schoolmaster's study, tidy enough to imply order, cluttered enough to betray exhaustion, and infused with the faint aroma of stale pipe tobacco, drying ink, and heavily trodden carpet. Marston himself sat behind a wooden desk scarred by decades of reports, elbows, teacups, and irritation. He looked up as the Beresfords entered, his eyes narrowing with the same mixture of suspicion and fondness he reserved for problematic family members. "Oh, not you two," he groaned. "I've barely recovered from your last excursion into helping." Tuppence set a small paper-wrapped parcel on his desk. "Nonsense. You adored every moment, and I've brought cake." "Ah," Marston said, softening instantly. "Well, sit down then." They settled into the stiff-backed chairs opposite him. Tommy leaned forward. "Marston, we need information about Mrs. Eleanor Draycott and her husband's death. And before you object—" "I shall object anyway," Marston interrupted. "Mrs. Draycott's husband passed away naturally. Heart failure. The matter was closed months ago." "Yet the medical report mentioned a bruise on his wrist," Tuppence said. "A mild one, but unexplained." Marston shifted in his chair. Doctors often record things of no significance. "Marston," Tommy said evenly, "a woman whispered to me last night that she killed her husband. A woman wearing Mrs. Draycott's precise perfume, bearing her silhouette, clearly in distress." Marston stared at him for a long moment, as though weighing Tommy's reputation for exaggeration against the sincerity in his voice. "You're certain?" "I'm certain of what I heard." The inspector sighed heavily. The bruise was noted, yes, but the doctor believed it could have been from a fall, or even pressure applied during an attempt to sit him up. Nothing sinister, no evidence to suggest foul play. The widow behaved with dignity if distant, and Henry Draycott himself was not a man anyone wished ill. Except perhaps his business partner, Tuppence suggested lightly. Marston looked at her sharply. What business partner? Oh dear, Tuppence murmured, exchanging a glance with Tommy. It seems the neighbourhood gossip outruns official channels. Marston set down his pen. Explain. So Tuppence did. She relayed what the neighbour had said. The late-night visitor with a limp, the secretive calls, the general air of fear inside the Draycott home. Marston frowned deeply. A man with a limp. I recall the name Basil Hargreaves on some old business registry. Draycott and Hargreaves Investments. But after Draycott's death, Hargreaves withdrew from public dealings. Quiet sort. No criminal record. Perfect for mischief, Tuppence said. Marston ignored her. What exactly are you two planning to do? Merely understand why a woman would confess murder in the dark, Tommy said. We're not launching a full investigation, just curiosity. Marston snorted. Your curiosity has the destructive capacity of a small bomb. Leave this to professionals. Of course, Tuppence said sweetly. We wouldn't dream of interfering. Tommy added, but if something odd turns up, then you will tell me immediately, Marston said, pointing a stern finger at them. No midnight escapades, no secret interviews, no amateur sleuthing. Absolutely, Tuppence agreed, rising. We shall be perfect angels. Once they were outside, she nudged Tommy with her elbow. Midnight escapades, she repeated, amused. Why do people say that as though it's a disreputable thing? Tommy smiled. It's the way you say it that worries them. The rest of the day unfolded in separate lines of inquiry. Tommy took it upon himself to find Basil Hargreaves. Tuppence, meanwhile, proceeded to do what she called community reconnaissance, which involved chatting with neighbours, shopkeepers, and anyone who looked as though they possessed a working pair of ears. Tuppence had a gift for coaxing information from people who ordinarily guarded their words. By afternoon, she had compiled an impressive list of rumours. Hargreaves was Draycott's business partner. They had quarrelled violently 3 weeks before Draycott's death, and Mrs. Draycott had recently sold several valuable paintings, claiming the money supported charity work. But one painting, a Turner-like landscape worth a handsome sum, had been sold to Hargreaves himself at a remarkably low price. When Tuppence told Tommy this later, he whistled. That's suspicious. Exceptionally, she confirmed, and the buyer didn't even display it. He stored it with a dealer. Why would anyone purchase art to hide it? Because the painting isn't the point, Tommy said. The transaction is. Meanwhile, Tommy had been equally productive. He learned that Hargreaves frequented a private gentleman's club off Fleet Street, one of those cloistered establishments where the carpets were worn, the port was dusty, and the conversations were whispered between armchairs as though conveying state secrets. Tommy decided infiltration was necessary. He borrowed an old membership card from a friend, straightened his tie, and walked in with the air of a man who frequented the place 3 times a week. No one questioned him. Clubs like these thrived on polite ignoring. In the dim lounge, Basil Hargreaves sat near the far window, his limp barely noticeable when seated. He possessed the sort of face that looked prematurely lined, worry etched into the brow, bitterness tugging at the mouth. A glass of whiskey rested untouched at his elbow. He leaned forward, speaking to another man whose back Tommy couldn't see. Tommy moved to a nearby armchair and pretended to read the newspaper while keeping his ears open. She's close to breaking, Hargreaves muttered. I warned her to keep quiet. The unseen man grunted something low. If she talks, Hargreaves continued, we're all ruined. Everything's at stake. Tommy's pulse quickened. The implication was unmistakable. Mrs. Draycott was being pressured, perhaps even threatened. Hargreaves lowered his voice further. Tommy strained to hear, but caught only fragments. Diary. Dangerous if found. Too much risk. Should have dealt with it sooner. The conversation ended abruptly when a waiter arrived with a fresh ashtray. Hargreaves stiffened, noticing movement nearby. Tommy hastily raised the paper higher, pretending to read the financial section with intense focus. After a minute, Hargreaves rose with effort and limped toward the exit. Tommy gave him a discreet head start, then followed. Outside, evening crowds streamed along Fleet Street. Hargreaves glanced over his shoulder once, perhaps wary, but did not spot Tommy. He proceeded down a side road, limping steadily. Tommy trailed him for several blocks until Hargreaves entered a tall, respectable building that bore the brass sign Hargreaves and Draycott Holdings, the business they once jointly owned. Tommy memorised the address, then turned back toward Kensington for their evening rendezvous. Tuppence had chosen a vantage point across from Mrs. Draycott's townhouse, a discreet bench beside a row of elm trees, to observe any late-night comings or goings. She held a newspaper in one hand, though she had not turned a page in half an hour. Her attention was fixed on the townhouse. At 9 o'clock, the front door opened cautiously. Mrs. Draycott stepped out, wrapped in a dark coat. Her movements were quick, furtive. She clutched a sealed envelope in both hands as though it were a lifeline. After glancing nervously up and down the street, she descended the steps and hurried toward the corner. Tuppence rose but remained in partial shadow. Mrs. Draycott paused by a lamp-post, her face tight with anxiety. She peered down the road again, scanning for pursuers. She seemed convinced someone would appear at any moment. Then, with palpable hesitation, she crossed the street and slipped down a narrow lane that led toward a post office and several quiet terraces. Tuppence followed at a distance, careful not to draw attention. Mrs. Draycott entered the post office, went straight to a private counter, and spoke with the clerk. She presented the sealed envelope with a trembling hand. The clerk weighed it, asked a question, and Mrs. Draycott nodded quickly. The transaction finished, she left the building with an air of relief and fear. Tuppence watched her hurry away, her coat pulling tightly around her as if shielding her from invisible dangers. Later that night, Tommy and Tuppence reunited at their sitting-room table. Their notes lay scattered before them, rumours, observations, addresses, fragments of overheard conversations. Tommy summarised his findings about Hargreaves. Tuppence recounted Mrs. Draycott's frantic outing and the mysterious envelope. Two puzzles lay before them, as clear as the ticking clock on the mantelpiece. A limping man warning someone to keep silent, a frightened widow posting a secret letter under cover of darkness. Both actions point to pressure, Tuppence said quietly, not guilt. Tommy rested his hands flat on the table. She's terrified, Tuppence. And Hargreaves, he's desperate. The unsentenced thought hung between them. Danger was rising, and whatever lay hidden behind Henry Draycott's death was about to pull them deeper. Tuppence believed in instinct the way some people believed in horoscopes, an unshakable certainty that the faintest tug on her intuition meant a thread worth pulling. And on the morning following their discoveries, that instinct tugged with the steadiness of a hand guiding her back toward Kensington. Mrs. Draycott's townhouse stood quiet beneath a crisp midday bustle, the type of London afternoon where delivery carts rattled, children chattered on their way home from school, and nothing in the world appeared particularly sinister. Appearances, Tuppence said as she climbed the steps, are quite overrated. Tommy followed, adjusting his tie. I suspect we're about to test that theory rather thoroughly. She gave a brisk knock. The door opened just enough to reveal the stern-faced woman they had seen before. Tall, iron-grey hair pinned in a strict coil, eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. She wore a plain black dress and an expression that suggested any visitor was a direct assault on her schedule. "Yes?" the housekeeper demanded. Tuppence turned on her most radiant smile. "Good afternoon. We hope to speak with Mrs. Draycott. A brief social call, you understand." The woman looked them up and down. "Madam is indisposed." "Is she?" Tuppence's tone remained warm, yet politely curious. "Perhaps she would still grant us a minute. We visited yesterday and she seemed unsettled." The housekeeper's jaw tightened. "Madam has had a difficult few days." Tommy leaned forward with an affable nod. "We merely wish to offer our kind regards." A moment of silent battle stretched. The housekeeper, clearly deciding something calculated behind her eyes, stepped back with reluctance. "Very well. Do not touch anything." "We wouldn't dream of it," Tuppence said, sweeping inside with Tommy close behind. The entryway felt different from the day before. Tension hummed just beneath the polished surfaces. As the housekeeper led Tommy onward, Tuppence drifted behind with careful nonchalance, her gaze flicking across the hall. A side table bore faint scorch marks, as though someone had burned a stack of papers in haste. A porcelain dish near the stairs was shifted just off-centre, betraying recent disturbance, and halfway down the hall, a study door stood ajar, revealing clutter that had definitely not existed during their previous visit. Tuppence paused. "Charming house," she commented lightly. The housekeeper turned sharply. "Madam is waiting." "Oh, forgive me, I'm terribly distractible." Tommy, catching her signal, struck up an innocent conversation. "I meant to ask, what lovely vases you have here. Are they imported?" The housekeeper glanced back, irritation sparking. "Italian, antique. If you would follow me." Tommy kept her engaged with questions about upkeep, cleaning and breakage, forcing her to respond with clipped, annoyed answers. It was enough. Tuppence slipped sideways into the study. The room looked as though a whirlwind of frantic hands had torn through it. Drawers hung open, paper scraps littered the carpet, and an overturned basket had spilled letters across the floor. Tuppence crouched quickly. The edge of a letter in the hearth caught her eye, half burned, its corner still legible. "Cannot guarantee safety if—" Before she could read further, Tommy's polite chatter faltered. "Ah, there you are, dear." Tuppence straightened, smoothing her skirt. "Just admiring the decor." The housekeeper's eyes raked over her, suspicion radiating. "This way." They followed her through a short corridor into a sitting room, elegantly arranged but surprisingly sparse, as though touches of warmth had been removed. Mrs. Eleanor Draycott sat near the window, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the delicate tremor more pronounced today. She wore a pale blue blouse that washed her complexion further, making her look fragile. "Tuppence, Mr. Beresford." Her voice held polite surprise, but the muscles around her eyes tightened. "We didn't mean to intrude," Tuppence said gently, taking a seat. "But we were worried about you." Mrs. Draycott's breath hitched. "There's no need for concern." Tommy sat opposite. "We're simply checking in after the theatre." Mrs. Draycott's fingers curled inward. "I left early. I did not speak with anyone backstage." Tuppence leaned forward. "My dear, someone whispered to my husband, whispered something desperate. We believe you asked for help." The widow's entire body went still as if every muscle locked simultaneously. I didn't. I couldn't have. You're mistaken." Her denial was brittle, unnatural, like thin glass forced to bear too much weight. "We only want to help," Tuppence said softly. "No," Mrs. Draycott whispered, her voice cracking. "You mustn't involve yourselves." The housekeeper appeared in the doorway again, rigid as a sentinel. "Madam, you shouldn't distress yourself." Mrs. Draycott flinched at her presence. I'm quite finished speaking." Tuppence rose. "Very well. We won't force you. But know this, whatever burden you're carrying, you don't carry it alone." Mrs. Draycott said nothing. She stared at her clasped hands, avoiding their eyes. As Tommy and Tuppence moved toward the exit, a stack of books toppled slightly on the writing table beside them. A small notebook slid free and dropped to the carpet with a faint thud. Tuppence automatically bent to retrieve it. Her eyes caught the embossed title before her fingers even closed around it. Draycott, Private Reflections. Mrs. Draycott darted forward with startling speed, snatching the book from Tuppence's hand. "That is private," she said sharply, voice raw with panic. Tuppence raised her palms in apology. "Of course. I meant no harm." Mrs. Draycott clutched the notebook to her chest as though it were a shield. The housekeeper watched with hawk-like intensity. "I believe it's time you left," the housekeeper said. There was no mistaking the dismissal. Outside the townhouse, Tuppence blew out a long, thoughtful breath. "Well," she murmured, "that diary is as suspicious as a cat walking away from a broken vase." Tommy nodded grimly. She panicked more about the notebook than the confession. "And that housekeeper," Tuppence added, "she hovers like a watchdog or a jailer." They began walking, weaving through the afternoon foot traffic. "Tommy," Tuppence continued thoughtfully, "think of the elements we have. A widow who trembles at questions, a business partner lurking at night, a burnt letter, a bruised wrist on a supposedly natural death, and now a diary she guards like treasure." "A diary titled Private Reflections," Tommy said, "which suggests personal thoughts, yet she reacted as though it contained dynamite." Tuppence tapped her chin. Henry Draycott was a businessman. Serious, methodical. If he suspected wrongdoing around him before he died, perhaps he left notes. Notes someone once destroyed. A someone, Tuppence mused, such as Basil Hargreaves. Tommy thought of the overheard conversation at the club, the warning, the threat, the mention of danger if something was found. "Hargreaves said she was close to breaking," he murmured. and that if she talks, they're all ruined. Tuppence lifted a brow, which aligns neatly with a hidden diary. They reached a quiet corner where a taxi waited. Tuppence paused before entering. "Tommy, whatever is in that diary, it's the key." "Agreed." "But retrieving it won't be simple," she said. "We can't brutishly demand it. She's too frightened, and the housekeeper too watchful." "She hid it for a reason," Tommy said. "People only cling to something when they fear it will be taken." Tuppence's voice softened. "Or when they fear the consequences of letting go." They climbed into the taxi. Tuppence leaned back against the seat, gazing through the window as the townhouse receded from view. "We must acquire that diary," she said quietly, discreetly. Tommy exhaled, feeling the gravity settle. Before Hargreaves, or the housekeeper, does. The taxi turned onto the main road, leaving behind the polished facade of Mrs. Draycott's home. But neither of them felt as though they had left danger behind. If anything, they were driving straight toward it. The night had settled over Kensington like a velvet curtain, punctuated only by the occasional distant clatter of a carriage and the soft hum of the street lamps. Tuppence Beresford stood near the shadowed edge of Mrs. Draycott's rear garden, her coat pulled snugly around her shoulders and eyes alight with mischief. The broken latch she had discovered earlier swung slightly in the night breeze, a perfect invitation for what she called an unofficial entry. She grinned at Tommy, who looked decidedly less enamoured. "You're sure about this plan?" he whispered, hands tucked in his pockets, though his grip on the small flashlight betrayed his anxiety. "Absolutely," Tuppence said, her voice carrying the glee of a strategist in full command. "See that gate? Broken latch. A gift, practically. We slip through. No one sees us. No one suspects. Elegance, discretion, and speed. And it's midnight. Perfect cover." Tommy exhaled slowly. Midnight. Broken latches. Creeping into a widow's house. I seem to recall a proverb about curiosity and calamity. "I believe it went, 'Curiosity and calamity make excellent partners,'" Tuppence replied with a smirk, pushing the gate open. "Come on, darling. Adventures await." They entered the garden quietly. Dew-damp grass pressed softly underfoot, and the faint scent of roses, clipped and perfumed from the summer, drifted through the air. The scullery door at the back of the house yielded without protest, swinging open on its worn hinges. The interior of the Draycott home seemed almost hollow, eerily so, as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. The faint creak of floorboards echoed unnaturally in the stillness, heightening the tension in Tommy's chest. "Why does it feel so empty?" he whispered. "Because someone else was here first," Tuppence replied, eyes darting toward the staircase, "and I suspect they left in haste." They crept upstairs, each step measured, careful not to betray their presence. The corridors smelled faintly of lavender polish and burned paper, an unusual mixture that spoke of recent disruption. Tommy pressed his back against the wall as Tuppence peered into the study doorway. The scene before them confirmed their suspicions. Drawers hung open, papers were strewn across the floor, and the chair that normally sat beneath the writing desk was overturned. Someone had searched the room thoroughly, and yet the diary, the most crucial object in this tableau, was conspicuously absent. Tuppence approached the desk with caution, scanning the area. She noted faint impressions on the polished wood, the outline of a hand, smudges of ink still drying. Then, near the fireplace, Tommy crouched over a torn page lying amid the scattered papers. He lifted it carefully. "Look at this," he whispered. Written in a precise hand, the letters read, "B.H. Safe." The rest of the page had been torn away. Tuppence sniffed the air faintly and froze. "Gardenia and clove." Tommy blinked. "The perfume." "Yes," she said. "Just like the night of the confession. She's been here recently. Someone, or Mrs. Draycott herself, fled when the intruder arrived." Their investigation halted suddenly. Footsteps, slow, measured, and unnervingly deliberate, sounded from below. The distinct creak of a floorboard on the landing, then a soft shuffle as someone approached the stairs. "Hide!" Tuppence hissed, grabbing Tommy's arm. They slipped into the linen cupboard tucked beside the study's entrance. The scent of mothballs and pressed linen surrounded them, a faint comfort amid the tension. Through the slits in the cupboard door they could see the housekeeper enter. She moved with the precision of someone trained in vigilance. Her black dress swept the floor as she strode past the desk, and her eyes scanned the room like a hawk assessing prey. Then she stopped, hand slipping inside her coat, and Tommy caught a glimpse of a revolver gleaming in the dim light. "Good heavens," he murmured. "A revolver?" Tuppence's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't merely a housekeeper. Someone's guarding more than furniture." The housekeeper's steps traced a deliberate path across the room, inspecting drawers, the desk, the papers, each movement calculated. Every so often she paused, listening, her hand brushing against the revolver. It was clear she knew exactly what she was protecting, and who might attempt to seize it. Tommy leaned closer. "Do you think she suspects us?" "Does it matter?" Tuppence whispered. "If she does, we can't be caught." The minutes stretched interminably. Tuppence signalled for Tommy to follow her lead. Timing each movement with the housekeeper's calculated shifts, they edged toward the door of the cupboard. Tommy's heart thudded as he felt every floorboard vibrate under the housekeeper's weight. Suddenly, a soft knock from above made them freeze. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, a shadow passed across the room. The housekeeper had turned, scanning the hall beyond. "Now!" Tuppence hissed. They darted from the cupboard into the narrow corridor, pressing against the wall, silent as shadows themselves. The study behind them remained a tableau of chaos, papers, and overturned furniture, bearing mute witness to prior intrusion. But the diary's absence gnawed at them, a silent threat they could not ignore. They descended the staircase with care. The house remained still except for the housekeeper's careful pacing in the study. Every step they took had to be calculated. Tommy's foot caught a loose floorboard. He froze. The click sounded like a cannon in the quiet house. The housekeeper's head snapped in their direction. Tuppence clutched his arm, pulling him into the shadows of the landing. After what felt like an eternity, she turned back, apparently reassured by the darkness and silence. Tommy exhaled slowly. That was far too close. Tuppence pressed a finger to her lips. "We're not done yet. We need the diary. Someone's hunting it, and they're willing to threaten a widow's life to get it." The Beresfords edged into the hall leading to the scullery door. Tommy paused. "Do you think Mrs. Draycott knew it would come to this?" Tuppence's gaze was fixed on the shadows. She probably feared it. That's why she trusted no one, not even her housekeeper entirely. Someone else might have broken in before us. The air carried a faint scent of burnt paper and the lingering aroma of gardenia. It was a whisper of the events that had transpired in the study, a subtle echo of panic and urgency. Tuppence inhaled. "It means we're on the right track. Whoever entered before was desperate. Whoever comes next may be dangerous." Tommy glanced back toward the study. "The housekeeper, she's armed. This is beyond simple burglary. Someone's guarding evidence." Tuppence nodded, her mind racing. "Exactly why we move fast and quiet. Midnight retrieval is delicate business. No heroics, no mistakes." They reached the rear scullery door. The latch, long broken, yielded with a soft click. Outside, the night was deep and still. Street lamps cast faint pools of light on the cobblestones, shadows stretching between buildings. A distant train whistled, slicing through the silence like a herald of vigilance. Tommy exhaled, wiping his palms on his trousers, every nerve on edge as usual. Tuppence gave a short, dry laugh. "And we thrive on it, darling. Otherwise, why would we be Beresfords?" They slipped through the garden quietly, returning to the shadows. The scent of roses mingled with damp earth, grounding them even as adrenaline surged. Behind them, the Draycott house remained silent, dark, its secrets intact, for the moment. "I hate that she's afraid," Tommy said, voice low. "And I hate that someone is forcing her into hiding." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Tuppence said softly. "It can make people act irrationally, or with extreme cunning. Mrs. Draycott might appear fragile, but she's clever enough to anticipate threats." Tommy frowned. "And the diary. If it's missing, then it's already in someone else's hands. Perhaps Hargreaves. Perhaps." He trailed off, eyes scanning the quiet street. Tuppence placed a hand on his arm. "We have enough to plan our next move. The diary is the key, and if someone is willing to wield a revolver to guard it, then it's important, more than either of us suspected." They moved away from the house, hearts pounding, limbs tense with relief and anticipation. Each step carried the knowledge that the hunt had begun in earnest. By the time dawn's faint glow began to soften the night sky, the Beresfords had retreated to a safe vantage point, reviewing the clues in whispered consultation. The ransacked study, the missing diary, the faint scent of gardenia and clove, the torn page marked B.H. safe, all painted a picture of danger circling closer to Mrs. Draycott, and by extension to them. Tuppence tapped her chin thoughtfully. The housekeeper, the diary, the intruder, all signals point to one truth. Someone is hunting the diary, and Mrs. Draycott's life may hang on it. We must act before dawn fully breaks. Tommy nodded, swallowing the last vestiges of fear. Discreetly then, and carefully, no mistakes. Tuppence smiled faintly, that spark of audacious energy that had carried them through every peril before. Discreet, careful, and absolutely thrilling. Are you ready, darling? He caught her eye. Always. And with that, the Beresfords melted into the early morning shadows, leaving the Draycott house behind. Its darkened windows concealed more than just a widow's secrets. They sheltered the first whispers of danger, a game of wits and courage that had only just begun. The morning had a peculiar clarity, the kind of light that revealed details normally swallowed by shadows. Tommy Beresford leaned against the corner of a narrow alley in the city, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, watching Basil Hargreaves stride briskly along the street. The limp in Hargreaves's gait was subtle, just enough to make his movements memorable without attracting overt attention, a tell that Tommy intended to exploit. Beside him, Tuppence adjusted her scarf with the casual air of someone on a shopping promenade, though her eyes flicked constantly from street corner to street corner, calculating the angles of surveillance. "Here's our man," she whispered, nodding toward Hargreaves. "Notice the limp? Subtle, calculated, possibly a remnant from that business quarrel with Draycott." Tommy squinted. "Calculated or feigned?" "Either way, it makes him predictable," she replied, her tone sharp with anticipation. "And predictability is our friend." Hargreaves entered a modest insurance office, exchanging terse words with the clerk behind the counter. Tommy and Tuppence ducked into a shadowed doorway opposite. Through the small glass panels of the office door, Tommy noted Hargreaves's movements with meticulous attention. The man received a small parcel, examined it quickly, then tucked it inside his coat before striding back onto the street. "Insurance office, parcel received," Tuppence murmured. "Next stop?" "The City Bank," Tommy said. "I've followed him this far. I intend to see the destination of whatever he's carrying." They tailed him discreetly, weaving through the morning crowd. The city streets thrummed with activity, clerks in bowler hats, boys balancing wicker baskets of newspapers, and porters hauling crates from the wharf. Hargreaves appeared oblivious, yet his glances over his shoulder hinted at a man accustomed to caution. The bank loomed ahead, a formidable structure of stone and iron, its polished brass doors gleaming in the rising sun. Tommy gestured toward a side entrance. "That's our point of entry, restricted corridor beyond, likely leading to the deposit boxes." Tuppence's eyes sparkled. "Then we create a diversion." Minutes later, Tommy found himself near the deposit boxes, heart hammering, while Tuppence enacted her ruse. She let her scarf slip from her shoulder, knees buckling ever so slightly, collapsing against the wall in the kind of fainting spell that seemed both authentic and theatrically perfect. A bank attendant rushed to her side, kneeling to offer assistance. Tommy seized the moment. Slipping through a partially open door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," he entered the corridor that led to the inner vault. The hum of mechanical locks and the scent of polished brass greeted him. He crouched behind a pillar, listening. A faint metallic clink announced Hargreaves's arrival. The man produced a small key and inserted it into the lock of a particular safe deposit box. Tommy's pulse quickened. "If anyone asks," Hargreaves whispered to the clerk, "tell them I've stored nothing today." Suspicious indeed. Tommy crouched lower, noting the subtle tension in Hargreaves's shoulders. There was something being concealed here, and Tommy intended to uncover it. He jotted mental notes rapidly, memorizing the box number engraved on Hargreaves's key, 187C. From his hiding place, Tommy caught sight of a second clerk observing Hargreaves with mild interest. The faint glint of a diamond cufflink caught the light, an unmistakable marker of someone in Hargreaves's confidence. Tommy's mind raced. This was no casual storage. It was meticulous, clandestine, and vital. Meanwhile, Tuppence had regained composure outside. She prowled along the street, overhearing snippets of conversation and subtly questioning merchants, porters, and anyone who might have noticed Hargreaves's route. She unearthed a critical thread. Henry Draycott had been preparing to expose a large-scale financial fraud involving forged estate valuations, all controlled by Hargreaves. The diary they sought could contain definitive proof, making it not merely valuable, but deadly in its implications. Tommy's snooping, however, came to a sudden halt. A uniformed guard rounded the corner, eyes scanning sharply. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice low but commanding. Tommy's heart leapt. Thinking quickly, he pressed against the pillar, feigning inspection of the vault mechanisms. "Merely admiring the craftsmanship," he said lightly. "One must appreciate the engineering." The guard's gaze lingered for a tense moment, then he moved on, muttering to a colleague about some routine inspection. Tommy exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to his chest. He emerged from his hiding spot, key detail firmly noted in his memory. The number 187C, the safe deposit box Hargreaves had accessed. That box, he realized, likely contained the diary, or at least crucial fragments of it. They regrouped on the street outside, the city's hum a muted backdrop to their excitement. "Everything in place?" Tuppence asked. "Box 187C, Tommy said. "Hargreaves has access. We need to be faster than he is and more discreet. That diary cannot remain in his hands another moment." Tuppence's brow furrowed in thought. "We'll need a plan, clever, precise, and just audacious enough to get the job done without him realizing we've been inside." "Perhaps we'll need more than audacity," Tommy muttered. "If that clerk is loyal, the bank itself is practically a fortress." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Then we prepare our assault. And remember, speed, discretion, and the element of surprise. No heroics, Tommy." "Heroics are my specialty," he said dryly. "But not tonight," she replied, giving him a mock glare. "Tonight, subtlety reigns supreme." They walked a short distance to a nearby cafe, taking seats in a quiet corner. Tuppence unfolded a small notebook, sketching the movements they had observed, noting entrances, exits, timing, and personnel. Tommy's pen danced across the margin, marking observations of Hargreaves's habits, the limp, the parcel, the key, the precise moments he allowed himself to be unobserved. "The diary," Tuppence murmured. "If its in 87C could prove everything, the fraud, the forged documents, perhaps even Hargreaves' intentions regarding Mrs. Draycott." "And if he removes it?" Tommy asked. "Then we act sooner," Tuppence said firmly. "We can't wait for him to decide whether to use it or destroy it. That's why we've spent the day mapping his movements, noting each step." The cafe hummed with quiet life. A teapot clinked on a saucer, a waitress passed with a tray of scones, and a distant bell announced the arrival of the postman. Yet in their corner, the atmosphere was taut, electric, thick with anticipation. "We'll need a diversion," Tommy said, "something to draw the clerk's attention while we access the box." Tuppence leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Perhaps something theatrical. A fainting spell at the right moment, a dropped item, or even a staged disturbance outside. Something that guarantees a brief window. And within that window," Tommy continued, "we retrieve the diary, lock it away somewhere safe, and vanish before anyone notices." "Exactly," Tuppence said. Her eyes sparkled. "Discretion, speed, audacity. It's almost poetic." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their plans settling upon them. Tommy looked out at the street. "Hargreaves doesn't know we've observed him. Not yet. That gives us an advantage." Tuppence's voice softened. "He's meticulous, Tommy. Cunning. But he underestimates Mrs. Draycott. And me." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Do I feel insulted or reassured?" "Reassured," she said firmly. "He doesn't know what we're capable of, and neither does the world outside this cafe." The afternoon light softened, hinting at dusk, as they finalized their mental preparations. The diary awaited. Box 187C held the key to the puzzle, and the next phase of their investigation would require precision, courage, and a touch of daring only the Beresfords could manage. By the time they left the cafe, the city's streets had grown quieter. The hum of the Thames in the distance, the faint glow of gas lamps, and the soft scuff of their shoes against cobblestones accompanied their silent departure. Each step brought them closer to the daring move that would secure the diary before Hargreaves could remove or destroy it. Tomorrow, they would act. Tonight, they waited, eyes sharp, minds alert, and hearts steady with resolve. The morning sun had scarcely touched the rooftops of Kensington when Tommy and Tuppence discovered that the Draycott house stood suspiciously quiet. The front door was locked, the windows shuttered, and the brass knocker glinted under a thin wash of dew. Inside, silence reigned, a silence so absolute that even the distant hum of the city seemed muted. "The widow's gone," Tuppence said softly, surveying the doorway. Tommy furrowed his brow. "Gone? You mean vanished?" Tuppence nodded. "Yes, and I don't like it. Not one bit." They approached the housekeeper, who appeared from the kitchen doorway like a shadow, her black dress swaying with the measured precision of someone unused to surprises. "Madam has gone," she said curtly. "She went to rest by the sea." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "By the sea? That's rather sudden, isn't it? And at this hour?" "She required a change of air," the housekeeper replied. Her tone was clipped, dismissive. "Now leave." Tuppence stepped closer. "Did she take anything with her?" The housekeeper hesitated, eyes flicking toward the desk. "Just a carpet bag. And she did not wish to be disturbed." Tommy's gaze followed her gesture. The desk drawer was open, and the gleam of brass caught his eye. "The revolver is missing," he murmured. The housekeeper's face remained impassive, but her shoulders stiffened. "That is none of your concern." Tuppence shot Tommy a meaningful glance. "None of your concern, or very much of it." They left the house quickly, moving down the street to consult their notes. The neighbour who had been so keenly observant the previous day appeared on her doorstep, watering a patch of begonias. "I saw her leave," she said immediately, noticing the Beresfords. "Distressed, carpet bag in hand. She didn't even glance back at the house." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged looks. Their investigation had shifted into high gear. "Night train," Tuppence murmured. "Brighton." A few telephone calls later, and the records from the taxi services and railway registries painted a clear picture. Mrs. Draycott had taken a late-night train under a false name, her departure from the city executed with the precision of someone determined to remain invisible. A helpful porter, recalling the anxious expression of a nervous woman, confirmed her identity through a fleeting description of her coat, gloves, and the distinctive scarf she always wore. Tommy leaned back, frowning. "So she's in Brighton, and she's already checked into a boarding house, under a false name no less." Tuppence tapped her chin. "Not guilt, Tommy, not running from herself. Someone is forcing her hand. She fears, or believes, that she'll be blamed for Henry's death if she speaks or exposes anything. And she carries something," Tommy said. "Something important. Otherwise, why disappear so completely?" By evening, the Beresfords had followed her trail to a small tea room near the pier. Its windows were frosted with condensation, warm lights spilling onto the cobblestones outside. The smell of brewing tea, fresh bread, and the faint salt of the sea air created a strangely comforting, yet tense atmosphere. They entered cautiously. At a corner table, hunched beneath a worn coat, sat Mrs. Eleanor Draycott. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a teacup, knuckles white. Her eyes, dark and haunted, flickered toward the door as though expecting every shadow to conceal a threat. "Mrs. Draycott," Tuppence whispered gently, approaching. The widow froze, her body stiffening as if caught in a net. Then, as recognition dawned, she bolted for the side door. Tommy sprang forward, but she tripped on the threshold, collapsing in tears onto the worn wooden floor. Tuppence knelt beside her, brushing back damp strands of hair. "Shh, it's all right. We're here to help." Mrs. Draycott's voice trembled. I don't know where to begin. I fear for myself, and for what I've left behind." Tommy crouched on the other side, keeping a careful watch on the room and the street outside. "Take your time, Mrs. Draycott. One thing at a time." Her hands clutched a small envelope to her chest. I believe my husband was murdered," she whispered, "and I may have withheld documents, papers that could incriminate me if they fall into the wrong hands." Tuppence's brow furrowed. "Documents? Incriminating how?" The widow shook her head, voice barely audible. Not criminal, but they reveal knowledge, things I feared, that someone might use them against me, against Henry. Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. The weight of danger was palpable. Every detail, every nuance of her fear spoke of external threat rather than internal guilt. Someone wanted her silenced. The tea-room door opened with a soft creak. Outside, shadows lengthened in the dim glow of the gas lamps. Tommy stiffened as a figure limped toward the entrance. Tuppence froze. "The man with the limp," she whispered. Mrs. Draycott clutched the envelope tighter, her eyes wide with terror. "Oh, no," she breathed. Tommy rose slowly, positioning himself between her and the door. "Stay calm, Mrs. Draycott. Whatever happens, we're right here." The figure stepped closer, deliberate, measured, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Each step reinforced the tension in the room. The limp was unmistakable. Hargreaves. Tuppence leaned forward, voice firm yet soothing. "He doesn't expect you to give anything away here, Eleanor. Just stay calm. We'll handle this." Mrs. Draycott's tears glistened under the warm lamplight. I can't let him." "You won't have to," Tommy said. "Not if we act carefully." Hargreaves' eyes scanned the tea-room, calculating and sharp. He paused at the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. Every muscle in his body radiated the patience and precision of a man accustomed to control. Tuppence's mind raced. They had to secure Mrs. Draycott, protect whatever she carried, and maintain cover. One wrong move, a sudden gesture, a startled gasp, could provoke him into action. Tommy stepped closer to Tuppence, whispering, "We may have seconds. Plan?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Encourage her to remain seated, keep eye contact with the street, and wait for a moment when he diverts his attention. Then we guide her out the back." The tension thickened. The room seemed smaller, warmer, each ticking of the wall clock amplified. Mrs. Draycott trembled violently, her hands clenching the envelope. Hargreaves moved again, limping across the cobbled threshold, eyes narrowing. He had not yet noticed the Beresfords' full positioning. Tuppence caught Tommy's arm. Now. Calm, precise, subtle. They both leaned slightly forward, poised to spring into coordinated action. Outside, a seagull cried, the sound oddly shrill against the quiet of the pier. The man with the limp paused mid-step, sensing movement inside, a faint awareness that something was amiss. Mrs. Draycott stifled a sob, her eyes darting toward the window. Tuppence whispered encouragement, brushing a hand over hers. "He doesn't know we're helping Eleanor. Not yet. Just trust us." Hargreaves's shadow fell across the windowsill. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged one last glance. They were ready. The night had transformed into a tense tableau, a desperate widow, two vigilant detectives, and a man with a limp poised at the threshold. Outside, the pier gleamed under the faint gaslight, and the gentle swell of the sea whispered against the boardwalk. Every second stretched, every heartbeat counted. And then, the first deliberate movement from Hargreaves made it clear. This confrontation was about to escalate. Hargreaves pushed the tea-room door wider. Everything suddenly exploded into action, carried on the evening breeze. The air, usually cozy and unthreatening, seemed to quiver with tension as Mrs. Eleanor Draycott clutched the small envelope to her chest. Her eyes were wide, haunted, scanning every shadow as though expecting them to leap from the walls. "Shh, it's all right, Mrs. Draycott," Tuppence whispered, kneeling beside her. "We're here to help, not to judge." The widow trembled violently, her breath coming in uneven gasps. I can't," she said. "If I speak, I'll ruin everything. Everyone will hate me. Henry." Before Tommy could respond, the door to the tea-room slammed open. Hargreaves stormed inside, his face twisted with anger, his limp exaggerated in haste. The patrons gasped, startled by the sudden intrusion, while the bell above the door jingled violently. "Eleanor," Hargreaves hissed, advancing with a hand outstretched as though to seize her. "You've already said too much." Mrs. Draycott recoiled, tripping over her chair in panic. Tommy leapt to his feet, placing himself between the two. "Not so fast," he shouted, voice firm. Hargreaves snarled, jabbing a finger toward Tommy. "Step aside, or I'll make her regret it." Tuppence moved instantly, sliding into a position to intercept Mrs. Draycott and holding her steady. "She's not going anywhere with you," she said sharply, her eyes flashing. "Not now, not ever." The scuffle that followed was brief but violent. Tommy grabbed Hargreaves's arm as the man swung around, attempting to drag the widow toward the door. Chairs toppled, cups rattled, and the tea-room owner shrieked, calling for the police. The patrons scattered, ducking behind tables, some shouting warnings. Hargreaves's weight and determination were formidable, but Tommy's agility and Tuppence's quick intervention kept Mrs. Draycott safe. In the chaos, the limp became erratic. Hargreaves stumbled slightly, losing his balance. A small brass key fell from his hand, clinking against the wooden floor. Tommy caught it instantly, recognition sharp as a dagger. Safe deposit box 187C. Realizing the confrontation was no longer tenable, Hargreaves broke free, limping toward the door and disappearing into the darkening street. The door swung shut behind him, leaving the tea room in stunned silence. Mrs. Draycott collapsed into her chair, trembling, and Tommy sat opposite her, gently taking her hands in his. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "He won't harm you here." She looked at them, tears streaking her pale cheeks. I can't tell anyone. Not fully. Not yet. He'll know if I do." Tuppence leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "We need to know everything, Mrs. Draycott. Every detail matters. We can protect you, but only if you speak." A long, shuddering breath escaped her. "It's about Henry, about what he discovered." She paused, gathering courage. Basil Hargreaves. He was forging signatures, siphoning money from trust accounts. Henry found out. He confronted Hargreaves on the night of his death. I heard everything, but I froze. I couldn't intervene." Her hands shook as she unfolded the small envelope, revealing papers inside. "When I later found Henry collapsed, I believed it was my fault. I failed him." Her voice broke and she hid her face in her hands. Tommy gently lifted her chin. "It wasn't your fault, Eleanor. He confronted a criminal. That is not your burden." She looked at him, haunted eyes meeting his. "Hargreaves, he threatened me. Told me that if I spoke, if I revealed what I had seen, it would be my end. I had to repeat the rehearsed story, surrender some of Henry's private notes, act as though everything was ordinary. But he didn't know the diary. He didn't know the real one was hidden elsewhere." Tuppence's fingers brushed over the envelope. "The diary?" she asked. Mrs. Draycott nodded. "Henry entrusted it to someone he trusted implicitly. Someone bright, efficient, always on time. I thought it meant a secretary, but I was wrong. I didn't know he had someone else in mind. And now, Hargreaves knows the rest of the house is empty. He has searched for it, perhaps with others, but they will not find it here. It isn't here." Tommy rubbed his temples. "Then why was the house searched? Who else wants the diary?" The widow shook her head. "I don't know, only that I feel certain the search was not by you, nor by any ordinary person. Someone is after it. I've never seen them, but they are clever." Tuppence sat back, pondering the revelation. Her mind worked quickly, connecting threads from the previous nights. Hargreaves's limp, the safe deposit box, the diary's secret, and the ominous searches at the Draycott house. She could feel the puzzle beginning to align, each piece sharpening the silhouette of danger. "Eleanor," she said gently, "the diary, do you know where it is now?" Mrs. Draycott shook her head again. "I feared to ask. I was told to remain silent, to act as though I understood nothing, that everything had been resolved naturally. And yet—" Her voice trailed off, thick with unspoken terror. Tommy leaned closer. "And the key?" "The key you found. Hargreaves intended to use it. He knew the box contained the proofs, perhaps the diary itself if Henry had moved things secretly. I never imagined he would follow me to Brighton. He has a reach I cannot escape." Tuppence's gaze sharpened. "We need to act quickly. If the diary is elsewhere, then Hargreaves must be desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." A sudden movement by the window caught all three eyes. Outside, a shadow lingered, limping slightly. Tuppence froze. "The man with the limp," she whispered. Mrs. Draycott gasped, clutching her coat tighter. "No, please." Tommy moved closer to shield her, scanning the dimly lit pier behind the glass. The figure paused, watching, calculating. Every step echoed faintly against the wooden boards. Tuppence's hand brushed over the envelope once more. "We need to secure this first," she said softly. "Then we deal with him." The widow looked from Tommy to Tuppence, trembling. I never thought anyone could help me. I thought I was alone, that I had to carry everything myself." "You're not alone," Tommy said firmly. "Not now, not ever. We'll see this through, Eleanor." Tuppence's eyes darted to the shadow. "And we may need to move fast. He won't linger." Hargreaves's silhouette shifted again. The limp gave him an uneven rhythm as he advanced slowly toward the tea-room door. Tuppence's mind raced, calculating distances, probable reaction times, and escape routes. She could feel Tommy's presence beside her, ready to intercept, to act. Mrs. Draycott's voice was barely a whisper. "Henry, he wanted to expose everything, the fraud, the manipulations, the thefts. He believed that only someone he trusted implicitly could protect it. I think it was meant for someone who could act without fear, without hesitation." Tuppence's eyes widened. The clue had always been there. Someone bright, efficient, always on time. A woman of initiative. Not a secretary, but the description fit herself perfectly. Tommy caught her glance. "You think he meant you?" Tuppence nodded slowly. "Yes. And if Hargreaves knew the diary existed, and that it had been entrusted elsewhere, he would stop at nothing to obtain it." The sound of the door handle rattling shattered the tenuous calm. Hargreaves was attempting to enter, every inch of his posture radiating menace. The bell above the door jangled faintly as he pushed against it, the first real confrontation inevitable. Tommy sprang to his feet, positioning himself in front of Mrs. Draycott. "Stay calm. Trust me." Tuppence moved to the side, ready to block any approach while simultaneously planning a diversion. Her mind catalogued every option. Escape through the back, barricade the front, or distract him long enough for Mrs. Draycott to move to safety. The shadow pressed against the doorway. Hargreaves's eyes scanned the room, his breath sharp, the limp emphasized as he shifted weight from foot to foot. Every second stretched, taut with potential violence, with the unknown yet inevitable clash. Mrs. Draycott clutched the envelope tighter, trembling. "Please, I can't." Tuppence's hand brushed her arm. "You can. You will. Just trust us. One step at a time." Hargreaves's approach slowed. He had seen them. The scuffle, the diary's absence, the brass key, all hinted at resistance. The moment had arrived, and the outcome would determine whether the truth remained hidden or finally emerged. The tea-room held its collective breath, the tension absolute. Outside, the sea whispered against the pier, as if offering a distant, impartial witness to the drama within. And then, the first movement, deliberate, sharp, and brimming with menace, signaled the confrontation was about to erupt. Hargreaves's hand tightened on the door handle, pushing it open another inch. Tuppence steadied Mrs. Draycott, keeping her low while Tommy shifted his position, ready to intercept. The tension snapped like a wire. Tuppence walked briskly alongside Tommy, her eyes scanning shop windows, alleyways, and corners, as if the very city might conceal clues in the cracks of pavement. "Every instinct of mine tells me," she murmured, "that the diary is not in the Draycott house, nor in Hargreaves's possession. Someone else has it, someone careful, precise, and reliable." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone with impeccable morals and perfect handwriting?" "Exactly," Tuppence replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. "A secretary, perhaps. Someone Henry trusted implicitly. Someone who is always punctual, accurate, and impossibly conscientious." Tommy's eyes flicked to her knowingly. "I see you've already drawn the map in your mind." Tuppence nodded. "Lorna Peebles, long-time secretary, Henry Draycott's confidant. She fits the description perfectly." By mid-morning they arrived at a modest, brick-fronted flat in Bloomsbury. The exterior was unassuming, a pale blue door with a brass knocker slightly tarnished by weather. Tuppence paused, noting the absence of the usual frills associated with middle-class elegance, no trailing curtains, no ornamental garden. "She likes things simple," Tuppence murmured, almost obsessively precise. Tommy knocked lightly. There was no answer. They waited, scanning the quiet street. Finally, a soft shuffling of feet and the faint scent of starch and lavender drifted from inside. The door opened to reveal Miss Lorna Peebles, her tall, angular frame clad in a conservative dress, hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed spectacles. "Oh," she breathed, visibly startled at the sight of them. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, what brings you here?" Tuppence inclined her head gently. "We have reason to believe Henry Draycott's diary may be in your care." Miss Peebles stiffened. I cannot discuss Mr. Draycott's personal affairs. They are delicate." Her gaze flicked nervously to a chair in the corner, slightly misaligned. Tuppence noticed the shift immediately. "A small sign of disturbance," Tuppence murmured under her breath. "And the faint scent of pipe tobacco." Tommy's eyes followed hers, but she despises smoking. Tuppence whispered, "Someone was here recently, not long ago, and her habits alone tell us it was unusual." Miss Peebles cleared her throat. I suppose it is time to be frank." She motioned for them inside, closing the door with an almost audible click that echoed in the perfectly ordered flat. "Henry Draycott entrusted his diary to me. He instructed that it must be delivered to the authorities should anything happen to him. I obeyed, and I hid it." Tommy leaned forward. "Where?" Miss Peebles swallowed. "I did not leave it here. I considered it too vulnerable, too easily discovered. I rented a locker at the station, a place I believed inconspicuous, private." Her hands trembled as she touched the edge of a meticulously stacked pile of papers on her desk. "I thought it safe, until recently. I began to sense someone following me." Tuppence's gaze sharpened. "And the key?" "It has gone missing," Miss Peebles admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I feared it had been stolen." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Then we must act swiftly. Where is the locker?" "Victoria Station," Miss Peebles said, her hand gripping the edge of her desk for support. I rented it under a different name, but the key, without it, we have only seconds to intercept." They hurried through the streets, the afternoon sun low, casting long shadows across cobbled alleys. The air carried the distant call of railway whistles, mingling with the murmur of pedestrians and the creak of tram lines. Arriving at Victoria Station, they wove through the throng of passengers, the luggage porters and the occasional conductor. Miss Peebles led them to a back corridor, barely noticed by passers-by, and paused before a row of lockers, each numbered with brass plaques. Tuppence crouched to inspect the lock. "Any sign of tampering?" she asked softly. Miss Peebles shook her head. "None. I hoped it would still be as I left it." Tommy inserted a small skeleton key, one he had acquired after studying Miss Peebles's ledger, and turned it. The door opened with a soft click. The locker, empty, revealed only a manila envelope lying at the bottom. Tuppence's hand hovered above it. "Empty," she said, frowning. "Someone removed it, but in their haste they've left something behind." Tommy bent forward. "What do you mean?" Tuppence pointed at the base of the locker. A narrow strip of carbon paper, taped beneath the shelf, bore a faint impression. Whoever removed the diary had overlooked it. With careful fingers, Tuppence peeled the strip free and held it under the flickering lamplight. Slowly the imprint became clear. "Property of Henry Draycott. Final revision." Miss Peebles's lips parted in shock. It wasn't destroyed?" "No," Tuppence said firmly. "It's been moved. Someone is already one step ahead. Someone with access, knowledge and motive." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "And that someone, naturally, is Basil Hargreaves." Miss Peebles's hands trembled. He could do anything to obtain it. I feared he would find me." Tuppence took a deep breath. "Then the game is clear. Whoever holds the diary must be intercepted before Hargreaves can remove or destroy it. And given his access, speed and subtlety are our only advantages." Tommy straightened, voice resolute. "We need to map his routine, find where he could have moved it, and plan our next move. No mistakes." Miss Peebles nodded. I can help. I know who had access to the locker when I last visited. I kept no records, fearing exposure, but the trail is fresh in my mind." Tuppence's mind raced. Every detail mattered. Hargreaves's limp, his meticulous habits, the stolen diary, and now the carbon imprint. The diary had not vanished into obscurity. It had been deliberately moved, deliberately concealed. The stakes were higher than ever. Outside, the station's bustle continued, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the shadows. Steam hissed from the trains, porters shouted destination calls, and a fog of coal smoke drifted along the platforms. Yet in the quiet corridor near the locker, the tension was absolute. Tuppence turned to Miss Peebles. Henry entrusted it to someone he trusted implicitly, bright, efficient, always on time. Do you know who that might refer to? The secretary shook her head. I believed he meant a secretary, perhaps me or one of his assistants. I cannot imagine anyone else. Tuppence's eyes flicked to Tommy, and a spark of realization ignited. No, it isn't the secretary, not in the conventional sense. The description, it matches someone we've already encountered. Someone remarkably competent, capable of observing and acting without hesitation. Tommy leaned closer, voice low. Tuppence, you mean? Yes, she said softly, her mind working rapidly. She was the one Henry trusted to protect the diary, and we've been interacting with her all along in plain sight. The person who has been one step ahead is closer than we imagined. Miss Peebles looked between them, confusion and dawning comprehension in her eyes. But if someone has moved it, and they are aware of Hargreaves, then, Tuppence nodded. Then we have both motive and access, and the diary is safe, for now. But time is critical. Hargreaves will not wait. He must be intercepted before he realizes it's missing, or takes steps to recover it. Tommy exhaled, straightening his coat. Then our next move is clear. We trace the diary, protect the widow, and ensure Hargreaves doesn't realize we know more than he thinks. Miss Peebles folded her hands tightly. I am at your disposal. Henry would have wanted it protected. I cannot fail him now. Tuppence's gaze hardened with determination. Then we move fast, carefully, and with every advantage we can muster. The diary is out there, waiting, and it will tell us everything if we are smart enough to intercept it first. The three of them emerged from the station corridor into the growing dusk. Gas lamps flickered along the platform, casting long shadows across the pavement. Steam hissed from a departing train, mingling with the scent of coal and salt air. The diary had been moved, but its trail was visible to those who could read it, and Tuppence and Tommy knew precisely how to follow it. The journey ahead would test their resolve, their courage, and their ingenuity. Hargreaves had underestimated them thus far, but the game was far from over. They were closing in, and the diary would not remain hidden much longer. Tuppence's eyes met Tommy's. "Ready?" she asked, voice firm. "Always," he replied, matching her determination. And so, in the gathering twilight, the Beresfords and Miss Peebles set out together, chasing a diary that contained the truth, a criminal to intercept, and the final pieces of a puzzle that had begun with a whisper in the dark. The city night was heavy with mist, the glow of gas lamps shimmering against slick cobblestones as Tommy and Tuppence Beresford made their way toward the bank where box 187C awaited. The brass key Hargreaves had dropped days earlier now rested safely in Tommy's pocket, its weight a small talisman of opportunity and danger. Beside him, Tuppence's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, every sense alert to the murmur of the city, the distant clatter of a carriage, and the faint scrape of footsteps that could signal friend or foe. "We're finally here," Tommy murmured, pressing the key to the lock. "Let's see what Hargreaves has been hiding so desperately." Tuppence's fingers tightened on his arm. "Expect the unexpected," she whispered. "If Basil is clever enough, the diary may not be where we think." The inner vault's cold metallic air greeted them, the scent of polished brass and paper mingling faintly with the must of old deposit boxes. Tommy inserted the key into box 187C. It turned smoothly with a soft click. They opened the box together. Inside, the contents were immediately surprising. No leather-bound diary awaited them. Instead, a small collection of envelopes, foreign bank slips stamped with distant cities, coded ledgers, letters with wax seals from anonymous correspondents, and a single cream envelope labelled in Henry Draycott's neat handwriting. Tuppence lifted the envelope, gingerly breaking the seal. She unfolded the paper inside, a single torn page scrawled in Draycott's firm, precise hand. "If anything befalls me, trust only the one who asks the right question." Tommy stared at the line. The diary may not be a book at all. Perhaps it's a set of documents distributed across different hiding places, each piece designed to expose Hargreaves and his accomplices. Tuppence nodded slowly. And the torn page hints at a second location. Only someone perceptive enough to ask the right question could discover it. Her eyes flicked to the coded ledgers. We need to cross-reference these fast. They returned to Miss Peebles, who had been tending to Mrs. Draycott at a secure location nearby. The secretary's expression was taut, her mind as sharp and meticulous as ever. "I can help decipher the code Henry used," she said quietly, unrolling the ledgers across a small table. "It's a simple substitution at first glance, but the repeated numbers hint at property and ledger entries hidden under ordinary accounts." Henry was cautious, but clever. Tuppence bent over the papers, tracing her finger along the coded numbers. "See here. This property appears again and again. 42, 17, 89, 3, 11, 21. Cross-reference with the ledger, and we may find the final hiding place." Tommy leaned closer, eyes scanning the columns. There, the pattern repeats across multiple sheets, tied to recent shipments and ledger transfers. I believe it points to an abandoned warehouse along the Thames, near the old shipping yards. Miss Peebles tapped the table anxiously. Hargreaves would have every reason to search there. He knows Henry would hide documents in a place inconspicuous, but reachable, and likely near his former business dealings. The evening was falling fast as the trio prepared to depart. The fog had thickened over the river, curling around cranes and warehouses in a silvery haze. Tommy checked his watch. "We'll move at night. He may be here already." By the time they arrived at the warehouse, the fog had deepened, muffling sound and distorting shadows. Lanterns flickered through the windows of the abandoned structure, their yellow light struggling to pierce the haze. The smell of damp timber, rust, and burnt paper hung in the air. "Look," Tuppence whispered, pointing toward the crates stacked haphazardly along the walls. Some had been opened, papers scattered. Others showed the blackened edges of burned documents. "Someone's been searching recently, definitely after Henry's final hiding place." Tommy's jaw tightened. "And it's not over. Hargreaves is likely inside. He knows the diary exists. He knows we know about 187C and the ledgers. If he discovers our presence..." Tuppence's eyes glimmered with determination. "Then we need the element of surprise. Let's approach quietly, observe first, then act. Timing is everything." They crept along the perimeter, sticking to the shadows, the gravel crunching faintly beneath their shoes. The warehouse's large iron doors were partially ajar, letting a slice of lantern light spill onto the misty cobbles. Inside, the silhouette of a man could be seen, moving frantically between crates. He paused, bent over a pile of papers, and then bent again to inspect a ledger, the light catching the sharp angles of his face. "Hargreaves," Tommy breathed. "He's alone, for now." Tuppence gestured. "Keep low, we need a vantage point." They found a stack of crates outside that offered a view through a cracked panel in the wall. From there they could see the man rifling through documents with methodical haste, muttering under his breath. "Every ledger, every letter," Hargreaves muttered. Where is it?" He threw a stack of papers onto the floor, scattering them. His voice was edged with panic. Tommy whispered, "He's searching for the final document. Whatever Henry hid, he believes it's here." Tuppence scanned the warehouse. A small alcove in the corner seemed untouched, its floor clean, its crates stacked in a precise line. She crouched slightly, pointing. "There, that corner. It's too orderly. He's overlooked it. Henry would never leave it completely exposed." Tommy nodded, silent acknowledgement passing between them. Miss Peebles, crouched nearby, shook her head in concern. "It's risky, but she's right. That must be where Henry hid the diary, or the final piece of it." Hargreaves, meanwhile, had grown more agitated. His limping gait was uneven, betraying his frustration. He had removed several lanterns from the crates, using them to illuminate the corners. Papers smouldered in the faint glow of embers where previous searches had failed. The urgency in his movements suggested desperation, not mere greed. "Keep calm," Tuppence whispered. "He won't notice us until the right moment. Wait for the distraction." Tommy surveyed the scene, noting possible routes, the main door, the alcove, the stacks of crates. He considered the timing, the shadows, and the angle of lantern light. If we make a noise at the far end, perhaps dropping one of the outer crates, we can divert him long enough for someone to reach the corner." Tuppence nodded, understanding instantly. "I'll handle the diversion. You move to secure the documents." She picked up a small, empty crate from the edge of the stack and let it tip over quietly, the sound muted by the fog and the creaking timbers. Hargreaves's head snapped up. His eyes darted to the source. Tommy and Miss Peebles slipped toward the alcove, moving with the stealth of cats. Hargreaves muttered angrily, gesturing at the fallen crate. "Not now. Focus." He limped toward the disturbance, unaware that their eyes were on the untouched corner. Tuppence's voice was low, calm, but carried an edge of authority. "Over here, if you please." She allowed a louder scrape, drawing Hargreaves' attention fully to the far side. Tommy seized the moment. He pulled a small bundle from beneath the alcove crates, a leather folder, its edges worn, containing papers and a notebook embossed with Henry Draycott's initials. His heart raced. The diary, or the remaining pieces, were finally in reach. Miss Peebles quickly helped gather the documents, stacking them carefully. "We need to leave before he realizes," she whispered. "Hargreaves is dangerous when cornered." Outside, the fog thickened. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a brief glance. "Ready?" he whispered. "Ready," Tuppence replied. They moved as one, careful, silent, the diary now fully in their possession, each step calculated to avoid detection. Hargreaves, still distracted by the diversion, had not yet noticed the missing documents. The diary, scattered, coded, and carefully hidden, was no longer a mystery in its entirety. But the puzzle had only deepened. Multiple hiding places, encrypted ledgers, and Hargreaves's frantic pursuit hinted at a far-reaching network of deceit. The confrontation was imminent. The final pieces of Henry Draycott's secrets now rested in the hands of those determined to uncover the truth. As they vanished into the misty night, the warehouse stood silent once more, the scattered papers and embers bearing witness to the deadly game that had been played within. The diary of motives had been found, but the battle to expose the man behind the crimes was only beginning. Inside the warehouse, the danger grew even worse, its iron frame casting long, distorted shadows across the waterlogged dock. The night air carried the faint tang of river salt mixed with the metallic tang of spilled coal and the acrid scent of recently scorched wood. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford crouched behind a stack of crates, their eyes tracking the flickering lantern light within, each movement magnified by anticipation and dread. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of towering crates, rickety shelves, and scattered papers. Hargreaves moved among them with a panicked precision, his limping gait betraying barely a moment's hesitation. Beside him, two unexpected figures flitted with nervous energy, a young clerk from his office fidgeting and muttering to himself, and the formidable housekeeper from the Draycott home, her eyes cold and calculating, moving with a discipline that suggested long practice in concealment and control. They were his accomplices, unseen until this night, each assisting in covering the fraud and eliminating any remaining evidence. Tommy whispered, "I don't like this. They're cornered, but he's desperate. Watch his hands." Tuppence's gaze swept the shadows. "And the diary. Wherever it is, he won't let it escape. We need a distraction." Hargreaves paused near a brazier, a bundle of papers clutched tightly in one hand. With a deranged glint in his eyes, he held them over the flickering flames. The paper hissed and curled, smoke rising to the rafters. "The diary dies with me," he shouted, voice hoarse with fury. "Henry Draycott should have been silenced long ago. His suspicions, his meddling, all wasted effort." The clerk's fingers trembled over a ledger, and the housekeeper's eyes darted nervously to the flickering fire, calculating escape routes and exits. Hargreaves's rant grew louder, each word punctuated with a sharp snap of a paper curling into flame. Tommy moved first. He slid silently along the edge of a stack of crates, eyes fixed on Hargreaves. "Enough, Basil! You won't destroy evidence with impunity," he shouted, trying to draw the man's attention. Hargreaves's head snapped toward him, fury flashing across his features. "Get away from me," he bellowed, lunging with surprising speed for a man of his gait. Tommy pivoted, narrowly avoiding the grasping hands that sought to crush him. Meanwhile, Tuppence pressed herself into the shadows, moving behind a stack of crates to where Mrs. Draycott had been tied earlier that day. The ropes cut into the frightened widow's wrists, but she had remained resolute in her silent terror. Tuppence knelt, whispering, "Stay calm, Eleanor. I've got you." With practiced ease, she cut the bindings, loosening them with steady hands while keeping her eyes on Hargreaves' every movement. The brazier's flames crackled and spat embers as Hargreaves swung another bundle of papers. Smoke began to fill the warehouse, coiling upward toward the high ceiling. The smell of burnt paper mingled with the damp, creating a stifling, tense atmosphere. The clerk coughed violently, stepping back from the smoke, while the housekeeper's stance stiffened with panic. Tuppence tugged at Mrs. Draycott, guiding her behind a stack of crates for cover. "Quickly, Eleanor. Stay low. Keep your head down." Tommy seized the opportunity. With a swift, calculated dash, he lunged toward Hargreaves, grabbing his arm and forcing the bundle away from the flames. Hargreaves twisted violently, knocking over a lantern. It fell to the floor with a shattering crash, spilling hot oil across the boards. A small fire flared, licking the wood and sending more smoke curling through the rafters. The accomplices panicked. The clerk bolted toward a side exit, the housekeeper following moments later, both disappearing into the night as the warehouse filled with smoke and confusion. Hargreaves, now isolated, staggered toward the center, waving his arms as if to smother the chaos. "Tommy!" Tuppence called, her voice slicing through the smoke. "There, under that tarp." She pointed to a corner where a small metal box lay hidden, its lock glinting in the lantern light. Tommy sprinted across the warehouse, ducking under falling crates and dodging flickering flames. Hargreaves noticed too late. His limping gait impeded his pursuit, giving Tommy just enough room. He yanked the metal box free and shouted for Tuppence. Together they made their way to a narrow corridor. Mrs. Draycott huddled close to Tuppence, clutching her shawl against the acrid smoke. Flames hissed behind them, devouring old crates and scattered papers, as the warehouse began to groan under the heat and strain. Wooden beams cracked and dust fell from the ceiling. They ducked into the corridor just as a section of the floorboards collapsed with a resonant, splintering sound, sending sparks into the air. Outside, the cool night air hit them like a balm, the smell of the Thames mixing with the faint tang of smoke. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the sound of the warehouse fire carried along the docks. Hargreaves, coughing and hacking, stumbled toward a side exit, flames licking at the edges of his coat. But before he could escape fully, a squad of officers, led by Inspector Marston, emerged from the fog, blocking the doorway. "Basil Hargreaves, stop where you are!" Marston's voice carried authority and finality. Hargreaves froze, his eyes darting wildly. He coughed violently, smoke and fear mingling in his expression. The metal box still clutched in Tommy and Tuppence's hands had been removed from his reach, and the knowledge that he was surrounded, trapped by both law and circumstance, began to settle over him like a heavy shroud. "I surrender," he rasped finally, shoulders slumping. "Take it, but the diary. Marston motioned to his officers to secure him. The man was shackled and led away, coughing, muttering fragments of threats and fury, while Tommy, Tuppence and Miss Peebles watched, hearts still pounding. The rescued metal box, once opened under the safer glare of a nearby lantern, revealed Henry Draycott's true diary. Meticulous, organized and precise, it contained a full account of Hargreaves's fraud, threats, and the final confrontation the night Henry died. Every entry was detailed, signatures forged, accounts siphoned, accomplices bribed or intimidated, and the coded notes that had misled investigators until now. Mrs. Draycott, still trembling, allowed herself a faint smile as she ran her fingers over the familiar handwriting. Henry, he was so thorough, so careful. Tuppence closed the diary gently. "Yes, and that thoroughness saved you and exposed Hargreaves." Tommy exhaled slowly. "It's over, or at least the immediate danger. Hargreaves won't be causing trouble for a long time." The warehouse behind them continued to smoulder, flames licking high and smoke curling upward into the early dawn. The police had cordoned off the area, ensuring no one could enter until the fire was extinguished and evidence catalogued. The acrid smell hung over the docks, a reminder of the chaos Hargreaves' desperation had wrought. Miss Peebles approached, brushing soot from her coat. "We've recovered the diary, but—" She paused, glancing at the river. "This fire, the destruction, it's fortunate that nothing else of value was lost." Tuppence's eyes flicked toward the Thames. The water shimmered under the pale light of dawn, reflecting the smoke curling skyward like ghostly fingers. Fortunate indeed, but more importantly, the truth is safe now. Marston arrived at their side, expression stern but approving. You've done remarkable work, Beresfords. We couldn't have intercepted him without your insight. I suggest you report every detail to the station before the day begins properly. Tommy nodded, glancing at Tuppence. Every last detail, Inspector, from the whisper in the dark to the last hiding place on the Thames. Mrs. Draycott stepped forward, her shawl wrapped tightly around her. Thank you, all of you. I can finally breathe. Tuppence gave her a reassuring smile. You've been brave, Eleanor, and Henry's meticulous planning ensured that even now his work protects you and exposes the truth. The Beresfords lingered a moment, watching as the first rays of sun struck the river. Smoke from the warehouse rose in silver plumes, merging with the morning mist, a visible testament to the night's drama and the final unravelling of Hargreaves's conspiracy. Tommy spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone else. All the pieces finally fit together, every ledger, every note, every coded instruction. Tuppence's hand brushed his arm. Yes, but the game of observation, intuition and courage, that was what made it all possible. Henry may have hidden the diary, but it took us to bring the truth into the light. Police activity swirled around them, officers cataloguing debris and questioning witnesses, while Marston ensured Hargreaves was secured for transport. The docks gradually returned to a semblance of normality, the river carrying away the last traces of smoke and danger. Tuppence bent down slightly, examining a scorched fragment of paper near the dockside. Every conspiracy leaves its trace, she murmured, even one as carefully hidden as Hargreaves. Tommy smiled faintly. And every clue we follow brings us closer to justice, though I doubt I'll forget the smell of smoke, the crackle of fire, or the sight of that brazier for many years to come. Mrs. Draycott, holding the diary close, allowed herself a quiet sigh. Henry, he prepared for every eventuality, and yet I never imagined it would come to this. But I'm grateful to all of you. As dawn broke fully over the river, painting the Thames in soft silver and gold, Tommy and Tuppence felt the tension of the last day's ease, replaced by the satisfaction of resolution. Smoke drifted upward like the last remnants of a dark secret, disappearing into the morning sky. Hargreaves's empire of deceit had crumbled, the diary's truth preserved, and the widow's peace secured, at least for now. The Beresfords lingered for a moment longer, watching the sun glint off the water. Tuppence's gaze swept the horizon. The city awakens, Tommy. But for us, this night belongs to Henry Draycott and the truth he left behind. Tommy nodded, eyes softening as he regarded the calm surface of the river. And to think it all began with a whispered confession in the dark. Tuppence's hand found his. Yes, darling, and we were listening. The dawn's light fully embraced the Thames, casting a warm glow over the dockside, the warehouse ruins, and the quiet city beyond. The conspiracy lay exposed, its shadows scattered, and justice, painstakingly earned, shone in the first light of day. Once the police had taken Hargreaves away and the fire crews declared the warehouse safe, Mrs. Draycott invited them to speak with her one last time. Illuminating the small drawing room with a warmth that seemed almost miraculous after the long nights of terror and pursuit, the scent of freshly brewed tea and lightly toasted bread mingled with the faint perfume lingering from Eleanor Draycott herself, a subtle fragrance of gardenia and clove that brought to mind her earlier whispered confession. She sat across from Tommy and Tuppence, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I cannot thank you enough," she said, her voice breaking, trembling between relief and lingering fear. "You have done more for me than I could ever imagine. You have returned my life." Tuppence reached across the small table and placed a steadying hand on the widow's. "No thanks necessary, Eleanor. We only did what needed to be done, and now," she added gently, "you can breathe without that weight on your shoulders." Tommy leaned back in his chair, allowing a moment for the calm to settle. "The truth has a peculiar way of arriving late, Mrs. Draycott, but it does come. Henry's death was tragic, but it was not your fault. The stress of the argument with Hargreaves, the fear, and that unfortunate oversight, the doctor's initial misjudgment, all contributed. You did not, and could not, prevent it." Eleanor's lips trembled, but her eyes softened with understanding. So, all those months of self-recrimination, unnecessary? Completely, Tuppence affirmed. You did exactly what anyone would have done, and now the real culprit has been exposed. You may finally forgive yourself. The door opened to admit Inspector Marston, his expression a mixture of begrudging respect and the habitual scowl he reserved for the Beresfords. "Ah," he said, voice carrying the authority of a man who had endured far too many surprises in his career. "I hear congratulations are in order, and perhaps a warning too. Beresfords, this was unorthodox. Let us agree not to make a habit of safe deposit box raids, eh?" Tuppence beamed, a sly glint in her eye. "Naturally, Inspector, but we couldn't resist a bit of detective work when so much depended on it." Marston's lips twitched. "Just keep your hands out of locked boxes unless you are officially sanctioned. It makes my hair turn grey." Tommy leaned forward, voice dry. "Noted, Inspector. We shall endeavour to behave, most of the time." Meanwhile, Miss Lorna Peebles, freed from the tension of fear that had gripped her during the pursuit of Hargreaves and the scattered diary, approached with a bundle of neatly tied papers in her hands. Her expression, usually stern and meticulous, softened into a smile that seemed genuine for the first time in weeks. "These are the remaining carbon copies and notes I retained," she said quietly. "Everything required to trace the stolen funds and recover the assets Hargreaves and his accomplices attempted to siphon. The authorities can now follow the trail completely." Tuppence leaned over to glance at the documents, impressed. "Excellent work, Miss Peebles. You've made the difference between a partial recovery and total justice." The secretary's eyes flicked toward Mrs. Draycott. "And Eleanor, your courage, despite your fear, ensured that nothing was lost. Henry's instructions, Henry's trust, all preserved." Eleanor's lips quivered with relief. "I never imagined I would see the day when I could smile without guilt." Later, the Beresfords returned home, walking through the familiar streets of Kensington with the first hints of morning brushing the skyline. The city was beginning to wake, the rattle of milk carts, the distant clang of trams, and the chatter of early pedestrians forming a gentle rhythm around them. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the gardens they passed, the sound of birds, and the comforting hum of normal life. Tuppence stretched and grinned. "I'm thinking of writing a book, How to Retrieve Diaries Without Getting Shot At." Tommy chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll need an entire chapter on fainting in banks as a distraction." She laughed. "Ah, yes, the fainting technique, essential for subtlety and success in high-risk situations." Tommy raised an eyebrow, voice wry. "I shall insist that any future collaboration include formal training in dodging violent men with brass keys and flammable papers." Tuppence's gaze softened, amusement giving way to affection. "And yet, we've managed every challenge so far. Courage, cunning, and a touch of panache." Their laughter mingled with the ambient sounds of morning, an ease settling over them after the tense weeks of pursuit, deception, and near disaster. The emotional rhythm of their adventure had found resolution, suspense and fear tempered with humour, triumph, and human warmth. When they reached their flat, a small, neatly wrapped parcel lay upon the hall table. Tommy picked it up carefully. The paper was plain, the handwriting delicate and precise. Inside rested a fountain pen, engraved with Henry Draycott's initials, and a short note. "Thank you for asking the right questions." Tommy turned the pen over in his hand, examining the elegant craftsmanship. The handwriting, neat and deliberate, was unmistakable. Tuppence's eyes flicked over it, recognition dawning. "Miss Peebles," she said softly, a gentle smile spreading across her face, a quiet tribute, her respect expressed without words. Tommy looked at her, touched by the gesture. She didn't need to, but the acknowledgement is appreciated. The lamp on the sideboard cast a soft, warm glow across the room as Tommy set the pen and note down carefully. He moved to switch off the lamp, the final act of closure signalling the end of a long, perilous sequence of events. Tuppence lingered by the window, observing the morning sun glinting off the rooftops. "She didn't confess murder, Tommy," she murmured, voice thoughtful. "She confessed fear, and we turned the lights back on." Tommy nodded, looking at the sun-drenched streets outside. "Yes, we did. And the truth. Henry's meticulous planning, the diary, the exposed fraud, it all survives because of careful observation and timely action. The room was quiet now, a gentle calm settling over the Beresfords' flat. The emotional turbulence of the past days, the terror, the suspense, the confrontation, had ebbed, leaving warmth, humour, and the satisfaction of justice well served. Mrs. Draycott's name had been cleared. Her actions, guided by fear and loyalty, were now understood. Hargreaves' empire of deceit lay dismantled, his accomplices exposed. The diary in its entirety preserved the evidence, Henry's meticulous notes ensuring that the law could follow every step of the fraud. Tuppence's eyes softened as she looked at Tommy. Another case closed, another danger averted. And yet, there's always a sense that more mysteries wait around the corner. Tommy allowed himself a faint smile. Yes, but for now, we rest. The light in the flat faded gently as the lamp clicked off. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent yet full of life. The Beresfords settled into the comfort of their home, hearts lighter, laughter softening into the morning hum. The adventure had ended, but its lessons, courage, observation, ingenuity, and the quiet power of asking the right questions, would linger, ready for the next challenge. Tuppence glanced at the fountain pen once more, her fingers brushing its smooth surface. Henry's trust preserved, a symbol of truth, courage, and careful planning. Tommy turned to her, voice soft. And we ensured it wasn't lost. The lights are back on, Tuppence, the shadows have receded. She smiled, content, the day unfolding with promise and calm. Yes, Tommy, the lights are back on. Outside, dawn broke fully over Kensington, spilling gold across the rooftops, the streets, and the distant Thames. The city awoke to ordinary life, but within one small flat, a sense of triumph and justice prevailed. The widow's fear had been dispelled, the fraud exposed, and Henry Draycott's meticulous legacy secured. The Beresfords, exhausted but victorious, exchanged a look that carried humour, relief, and quiet satisfaction. Their work, their instincts, and their courage had restored light to a life long shadowed by fear. And so the story closed, with justice, warmth, and the gentle triumph of careful observation over malice, deception, and dread.